Most people think motivation is the problem. It isn't. You know exactly what it feels like to have something important in front of you, carry it in your head all day, and still not begin. Not because you do not care, because the task already feels too heavy before you touch it. That is the hidden enemy. Not a lack of ambition, not a lack of intelligence. Pressure. Perfection. The quiet belief that you need to feel ready, clear, and in control before you start. In this audiobook, we are going to look at why simple things become emotionally expensive, why delay keeps feeding itself, and how to break that pattern without turning your life into another war with yourself. This is the shift from overloaded and avoidant to lighter, calmer, and able to move. Stay with me, because once you see what is really making the work feel heavy, you stop blaming your character and start changing the pattern. Chapter 1. You are not lazy. You are overloaded. There is a kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with hard work. You know it well. You wake up already thinking about what needs to be done. You carry the task in your mind for hours. You rehearse it. You postpone it. You come back to it again and again in your head. By the end of the day, you feel drained even though you barely started. That feeling confuses a lot of people. They look at the empty page, the unopened document, the ignored message, the delayed decision, and they give themselves a cruel name: lazy, weak, undisciplined. But that is not always the truth. Very often the real problem is heavier and quieter. You are not doing nothing because you do not care. You are standing still because too much is pressing down on you at once. Too many expectations, too many unfinished thoughts, too many standards, too many inner voices saying, this has to be done well, this has to be done now, this has to fix everything. This has to prove something about you. That is not laziness. That is overload. And overload has a way of freezing even serious people. A lazy person does not think about the task all day. A lazy person does not feel guilty before even starting. A lazy person does not go to bed with the task still sitting on the chest like a weight. Many people who call themselves lazy are not careless at all. They care too much. They want to do it right. They want to do all of it. They want to catch up, make up for lost time, erase past mistakes, and produce something good enough to silence their own disappointment. That is a lot to carry into one ordinary task. No wonder the body hesitates. No wonder the mind drifts. No wonder starting feels heavier than it should. When everything becomes loaded with meaning, even a small step begins to feel like a test of worth. Then delay starts to feel personal. You do not just think, I have not done the work. You think there is something wrong with me. That is where the damage grows. Because once you call yourself lazy, you stop looking for the real weight. You turn a condition into an identity. You turn something that can be understood into something that feels permanent. Shame enters the room. Shame never helps you begin. Shame darkens the task. Shame adds heat to an already overheated mind. Shame tells you that you need more force, more pressure, more punishment. But pressure is often what made you freeze in the first place, so the cycle tightens. You avoid because the task feels heavy. Then you judge yourself for avoiding it. Then the judgment makes the task feel heavier. Then you avoid it again. Day after day, this builds a private war inside you. You are not only fighting the work, you are fighting your own view of yourself. And there is another layer people rarely name clearly enough: the growing sense that you are falling behind your own image of who you should be by now. Every postponed task leaves residue. Every avoided promise leaves a mark. Every delayed beginning adds one more piece of evidence to the case against yourself. I should be further by now. I should be better than this by now. I should not still be struggling with something this simple. That accumulated sense of inadequacy becomes part of the load. Now, you are not only facing today's task, you are also facing the memory of other days when you avoided, hesitated, or disappointed yourself. The current task starts carrying old failure. It starts carrying comparison. It starts carrying the growing fear that you are becoming smaller than your own expectations. That is why the exhaustion is real, even when little gets done. You are spending energy carrying, resisting, judging, comparing, and fearing. That is still effort. It is just effort with no forward motion. You need to see this clearly. Standing still does not always mean you are weak. Sometimes it means your inner system is congested. Sometimes it means you have attached one task to too many emotional costs. Sometimes it means you have lived with so much invisible pressure that your mind has learned to protect itself by delaying. That protection is costly, but it is not proof that you are broken. It is proof that something in the way you are carrying life needs to change. This matters because you cannot solve overload by insulting yourself. You cannot solve pressure by becoming another source of pressure. You cannot create steady action from a mind that feels hunted all day. Real change starts with a cleaner diagnosis, not softer in a dishonest way, clearer in a useful way. You do not need excuses, you need accuracy. And the accurate truth is this: many times what looks like laziness from the outside is actually the inside. Collapsing under too much weight, too much meaning, too much urgency, too many old disappointments still hanging over the present moment, too much self-surveillance, too much fear of doing it badly. Once you understand that something important happens, you stop turning every delay into a moral failure. You begin to see it as a signal that your mind is crowded, a signal that the task is carrying more pressure than it can bear, a signal that you do not need more hate. You need less hidden weight. That shift matters, because the moment you stop saying, "I am lazy," you make room for a better question. What is making this so heavy? What am I carrying into this task that does not belong here? What old disappointment am I dragging into today's step? What am I demanding from this moment that turns one step into a burden? Those questions open doors. Self-attack closes them. This book will not ask you to hate yourself into motion. That road has already shown you what it produces: more guilt, more avoidance, more inner noise. We are going to take a different road. We are going to understand the pressure before we talk about performance. We are going to reduce the hidden load before we demand more output. We are going to stop confusing paralysis with character. Because you do not need to despise yourself to begin. You need to understand what is crushing your ability to move. Chapter 2. A calm mind starts faster. Once you stop calling yourself lazy, a new question appears. If force is not the answer, then what is? The answer is not more excitement. It is not waiting for the perfect mood. It is not a dramatic burst of motivation. What you need first is a calmer mind, not a passive mind, not a sleepy mind, a calmer mind. A mind with less noise, less resistance, less inner conflict. Because action does not depend on willpower alone. It also depends on state. A tense mind turns simple things into heavy things. A crowded mind makes small decisions feel complicated. A pressured mind does not move cleanly. It second guesses. It delays. It keeps searching for certainty before taking one step. That is why even easy tasks can feel strangely hard on some days. The task did not always change. Your inner state did. When the mind is overloaded, every choice feels like it carries too much weight. Start now or later. Do it fully or not at all. Finish everything or do not bother. Get it right or prove that you are failing again. This is how resistance grows. It does not always scream. Sometimes it whispers through hesitation, overthinking, and quiet dread. Then people make a common mistake. They think the answer is to push harder, tighten up, threaten yourself, add more urgency, talk to yourself like an enemy. For a short moment that may create movement. Fear can create a burst. Panic can create a deadline sprint. Shame can force a few steps. But this is not a strong system. It is a burning system. It teaches your mind to connect work with inner violence. It teaches your body that beginning means entering a fight. After enough repetitions, of course, you resist. Of course, you pull away. Your system is trying to avoid pain, not avoid purpose. You need to understand this deeply. Calm is not weakness. Calm is traction. Calm is what allows the mind to see one step instead of 100. Calm lowers the volume of the inner courtroom. Calm reduces the friction between knowing and doing. A calm mind starts faster because it is not spending half its energy arguing with itself. It does not need to win a battle before opening the file. It does not need to become a different person before doing one necessary thing. It simply enters. It begins. This is why your first job is not always to increase determination. Very often your first job is to reduce resistance. That is a different philosophy, and it changes everything. Instead of asking, how do I force myself to do more? You begin asking, how do I make it easier for my mind to stop fighting the next step? Instead of worshiping intensity, you begin respecting clarity. Instead of chasing a powerful mood, you start building a usable state. This matters because many people have been trained to trust tension more than calm. They only feel serious when they feel stressed. They only feel productive when they feel tight. They think that if they relax, they will drift. If they ease up, they will become careless. But that belief costs them more than they realize. It turns every task into a threat. It makes work feel like punishment. It keeps the nervous system in a constant state of defense. You cannot build a sustainable life that way. You can survive on pressure for a while. You can even produce on pressure for a while. But you will pay for it in dread, inconsistency, and collapse. A better way exists. A door does not open because you hate it. It opens when the lock is released. Your mind works in a similar way. More anger does not always create motion. Sometimes it creates more bracing, more stiffness, more delay. But when the inner lock loosens, movement becomes possible again. Not magical, not effortless, just possible. And possible is enough. You do not need to become unstoppable today. You need to become less obstructed. That is the real beginning. Less inner shouting. Less all or nothing thinking. Less pressure to solve your whole life in one sitting. When resistance drops, action becomes less dramatic and more natural. That is what we want. Not one heroic performance. A cleaner relationship with beginning. A mind that does not need to be dragged into every task. A way of working that does not require self-attack as fuel. Rest is not only a reward after action. Calm is a condition for action. That truth matters. This book is not treating calm as a prize you earn after proving yourself. It is treating calm as part of the doorway back into work. This is the principle that will carry the rest of the book. We are not trying to make you harsher. We are trying to make you clearer, steadier, and easier to mobilize. Because when the mind calms down, decisions simplify. When decisions simplify, starting gets lighter. When starting gets lighter, the work no longer feels like a mountain before the first step. So stop worshiping pressure as if pressure proves seriousness. Stop assuming that suffering is the only doorway into action. A calm mind is not a luxury. It is a working condition. It is the ground where real movement begins. And if you want to start faster, stop asking how to become more brutal with yourself. Ask how to become less divided inside. That is where your next step becomes available. Chapter 3. Why you keep putting things off. You do not keep putting things off because you are careless. You do it because something predictable happens inside you, and it happens so fast that you often mistake it for your personality. A task appears. It could be small. It could be important. It could be something you have known for days that you need to do. At first, it is just a task. Then your mind adds weight. This matters. This might be hard. This could go badly. This needs to be done well. This has been delayed too long. This says something about me. In a few seconds, the task is no longer just a task. It becomes pressure. Then your body responds to that pressure before your logic can catch up. You hesitate. You open another tab. You check something small. You tell yourself you will begin in a few minutes. You soften the moment by stepping away from it. And in that exact moment, your mind gets a small reward. Relief. Temporary relief, but relief all the same. That is why the pattern repeats. Avoidance works for a moment. It lowers discomfort now. It removes the heat now. It gives you a brief sense that you escaped something heavy. But that relief never comes free. It leaves a bill, because the task is still there. And now, it comes back with something extra attached to it. Guilt, frustration, self-doubt, a sense that you are behind again, a sense that you failed another simple test. So when you face the task the next time, you are not facing the original task anymore. You are facing the task plus yesterday's avoidance, the task plus guilt, the task plus disappointment, the task plus fear that this pattern is becoming who you are. That is why it feels heavier each time. Delay adds emotional weight. It does not keep things still, it makes them worse. This is the loop you need to see. There is a task, then there is pressure, then there is avoidance, then there is temporary relief, then there is guilt, then there is more pressure. Then there is more avoidance. This is not random. This is a cycle. And until you see it as a cycle, you will keep turning every episode into a separate personal failure. You will keep thinking, I failed again. I was weak again. I had no discipline again. But the truth is more precise than that. You are repeating a system. And systems can be interrupted. A lazy story says, I do not do things because I do not care. A more honest story says, I keep meeting a task after it has already been loaded with pressure, and then I step away for a moment, and that escape trains the pattern deeper. That is harder to admit, but it is far more useful. Because the second story gives you something real to work with. Many people do not understand how much of procrastination is about emotional management, not time management. They think the problem begins when they fail to act. Very often the problem begins much earlier in the way the task is felt. A task that feels neutral is easier to approach. A task that feels loaded with judgment consequences and self-measurement becomes threatening. Then avoidance begins to make sense, not good sense, not productive sense, but nervous system sense. Your mind is not always asking what is the best long-term move. Very often, it is asking, how do I reduce discomfort right now? That is why the pattern feels so irrational from the outside and so understandable from the inside. You know, avoidance is hurting you. You know, delay is making tomorrow worse. You know, this is costing your peace, your confidence, and your progress. But in the short term, stepping away feels easier than stepping in. That is the power of the loop. It gives short-term comfort and long-term pain. And the longer you stay in it, the more it changes how you see yourself. This is one of the deepest costs of procrastination. It does not only steal time, it steals self-trust. Every delayed promise becomes evidence in the private case you are building against yourself. I said I would do it and I did not. I said tomorrow and I did not. I knew it mattered and I still avoided it. Over time, this becomes more than a scheduling problem. It becomes an identity wound. You stop trusting your own words. You stop feeling clean inside. Even when no one else sees it, you feel it. That is why procrastination is so exhausting. It is not just undone work. It is the weight of living with repeated inner breakage. But here is the turning point. If procrastination is a loop, then it has links. And if it has links, it has points where it can be broken. You do not have to solve your whole life to start interrupting it. You need to stop describing the whole thing as a character flaw and start seeing the mechanism clearly. The mechanism matters. The sequence matters. The pressure matters. The short relief matters. The guilt matters. Until now, you may have been trying to attack the last visible part of the chain. You told yourself to just do it, to stop being weak, to get serious. But the chain often starts before the action point. It starts when the task gets inflated, when the pressure spikes, when the emotional cost rises too high. That is where the next chapter must go. Because if you want to stop putting things off, you cannot only stare at your schedule. You have to look at the hidden force that makes simple things feel too heavy to touch. That force is pressure. And until you understand pressure, you will keep blaming time for a problem that begins much deeper inside. Chapter 4. The real problem is not time. It is pressure. A lot of people say they do not have enough time when what they really do not have is enough inner space. That difference matters, because if you misname the problem, you chase the wrong solution. You buy better tools, you make cleaner lists, you build tighter schedules, you promise to wake up earlier, you look for a better system. Sometimes those things help. But often, they do not solve the real blockage because the real blockage is not the calendar. It is the pressure attached to the task. To be clear, actual lack of time is real. Some seasons are genuinely crowded. Some people are carrying too many responsibilities, too many obligations, too many real demands inside too few hours. That kind of strain exists. It should not be denied. But pressure-created paralysis is different. Pressure-created paralysis happens when the clock is not the only thing pressing on you. The task is also carrying emotional weight that makes a manageable action feel unbearable. The distinction matters. One problem says, I truly do not have enough available hours for everything on my plate. The other says, I do have a possible opening, but the task feels so loaded that I still cannot enter it cleanly. If you do not separate those two problems, you will keep prescribing scheduling solutions for a pressure problem. And then you will wonder why better calendars still fail to move you. Pressure is what turns a simple action into a loaded event. Pressure is what makes an email feel like judgment, a draft feel like exposure, a decision feel like a test of worth. Pressure is the invisible layer that says, this must go well, this must be smart, this must be fast, this must make up for lost time, this must prove that I am capable. This must not show weakness. This must not disappoint anyone, including me. Once that layer gets thick enough, even 5 minutes of work can feel like too much. Then you say, I do not have time. But often, the deeper truth is, I do not know how to face the pressure this task now carries. This is why two people can have the same amount of work and experience it very differently. One sees a task, the other sees a verdict. One sees a step, the other sees a wall. The difference is not always discipline. The difference is often the amount of psychological weight placed on the moment. A person can sit in front of a 15-minute task and feel drained before starting because the task is no longer 15 minutes in the mind. It has become loaded with self-measurement. It has become tied to old delay, old shame, old standards, and old fear. This is what pressure does. It stretches the emotional size of the work far beyond its practical size. Then, your brain responds to the emotional size, not the actual size. This is why time management alone often disappoints people who are stuck. They keep trying to organize what they have not yet learned how to approach emotionally. They keep cleaning the outside while the inside remains tense. They keep asking, how do I fit this in, when a more honest question would be, why does this feel so loaded in the first place? Pressure usually speaks in the language of must. I must do this well. I must do it now. I must do all of it. I must not make mistakes. I must not fall behind again. I must not look foolish. I must not waste this opportunity. That word must creates force, but too much of it creates paralysis. A mind full of must is rarely a mind at ease. It is a mind bracing for impact. And when the mind braces, it does not move freely. It tightens. It delays. It waits for the perfect moment, the right mood, the extra push, the cleaner plan. But the real issue is not the missing plan. It is the overload carried into the plan. This is why pressure must be named as the central problem. Not because time is irrelevant. Time matters. Deadlines matter. Capacity matters. But the honest question is this: am I blocked because there is truly no room, or am I blocked because pressure has made the room feel unusable? That question can save you from months of false diagnosis. When there is an actual lack of time, the answer involves capacity trade-offs and fewer commitments. When there is pressure-created paralysis, the answer involves reducing emotional load, not just rearranging hours. Both problems matter, but they are not the same problem. Even in crowded seasons, pressure decides whether you meet the work as a problem to work through or as a threat to survive. That distinction changes your whole experience. Think about how often a small task gets mentally expanded. One message becomes a performance. One page becomes a referendum on your talent. One delayed call becomes proof that you are irresponsible. One unfinished project becomes evidence that you never follow through. The external action stays small. The internal meaning becomes huge. That gap is where paralysis grows. The task itself is not always what defeats you. Very often it is the pressure story attached to it, and that pressure story is strengthened by perfection. The more you believe there is one right version, one right moment, one right impression, one right outcome, the heavier each beginning becomes. This is why the next stage of this book must go there. Pressure is not the final route. It has a supplier. It has a hidden engine. And one of its strongest engines is perfectionism. But before we get there, you need to lock in one truth. You are not always behind because you are bad with time. Sometimes you are behind because pressure has made starting too expensive inside your own mind. That truth is not an excuse. It is a correction. It stops you from wasting energy on the wrong diagnosis. It stops you from treating yourself like a broken machine that only needs stricter scheduling. You are not a machine. You are a human being trying to act under emotional load. And if you want consistent action, you have to reduce unnecessary load. That starts by seeing the problem clearly, not just a full calendar, not just poor habits, pressure. Invisible, constant, often self-generated pressure. Pressure that turns ordinary work into a private threat. Pressure that makes you hesitate before the first step. Pressure that convinces you that you need more time when what you truly need is less internal weight. See that clearly. Because once you do, you stop chasing the wrong cure. And once you stop chasing the wrong cure, you are finally ready to confront the polished trap that keeps feeding this pressure day after day, the demand to do everything beautifully before you even begin. Chapter 5. Perfection is why you never begin. Perfection does not always look dangerous. That is why it traps so many people for so long. It does not enter your life looking like fear. It often enters looking like standards. It sounds intelligent. It sounds responsible. It sounds serious. It tells you to wait until you understand more, prepare more, feel more ready, become more capable, and make a better first move. It tells you that rushing is careless and that starting too early will only expose weakness. On the surface, all of that can sound wise. But you need to see what perfection does in real life, not in theory. In real life, perfection does not only raise the quality bar at the end, it raises the entry bar at the beginning. And once the beginning becomes too expensive, you stop entering. That is the trap. You do not only want to do the work well, you want to begin well, feel ready, think clearly, and produce a first version that already feels respectable. That demand sounds high-minded, but it creates paralysis. Because most meaningful work does not begin cleanly. Most meaningful work begins messy, uncertain, awkward, incomplete, and ordinary. Perfection refuses to honor that stage. It wants to skip it. It wants the confidence of experience without the clumsy path that creates experience. It wants a good result without tolerating a rough beginning. That is why it keeps you stuck near the starting line. You tell yourself you are waiting to do it properly. But very often, you are waiting to avoid the discomfort of seeing an imperfect first attempt with your own eyes. Perfection is attractive because it protects your image in the short term. If you do not begin, your fantasy stays beautiful. The idea remains untouched. The plan stays clean. The project still looks promising inside your head. The moment you begin, reality enters. Your sentences may sound weaker than expected. Your thinking may be less organized than you imagined. Your skill may not match your standards yet. Perfection hates that collision. It would rather delay than let you meet the truth of your current level. That is why perfection is rarely just about quality. It is often about self-protection. It says, if I wait a little longer, I can avoid producing something that disappoints me. But that delay has a cost. While you are protecting your image, you are sacrificing movement. While you are preserving the fantasy, you are postponing the training. While you are waiting to look capable, you are blocking the process that would actually make you capable. That is the cruel elegance of perfectionism. It uses the language of excellence to justify non-participation. It lets you feel thoughtful while remaining inactive. It lets you feel serious while avoiding the very friction that growth requires. You can hear it in the common phrases people use. I need to research more. I need more time to think. I should wait until I have a better mood. I want to start when I can really give it my best. I will do it once things calm down. None of those sentences sound lazy. That is exactly why they are so effective. They are socially acceptable forms of delay. They let you step away without calling it avoidance. But look at the pattern honestly. How often has that strategy actually moved your life forward? How often has waiting made the work lighter instead of heavier? How often has the perfect opening actually arrived? The truth is hard and simple. Perfection does not lead you gently toward action. It keeps moving the gate. It keeps saying, "Not yet. Not like this. Not with this much uncertainty. Not with this level of skill. Not in this kind of day. Not until you can do it in a way that feels worthy." And while you keep negotiating with that voice, time keeps passing. Opportunities cool off. Projects harden in your imagination. The task gathers myth. The longer you wait, the more sacred the beginning becomes. Then starting feels even harder because now it has to justify the waiting too. Now it has to be good enough to match all the time you spent not starting. This is why perfection is one of the deepest suppliers of pressure. It does not just say, "Do well." It says, "Do well" from the first visible move. It does not just ask for standards. It asks for immediate proof. And that is too heavy for a real beginning. Real beginnings are not proof. They are contact. They are awkward contact with the work in its unfinished form. You do not begin because you are ready. You begin because you are willing to enter the rough stage without turning it into a judgment of your worth. That is what perfection resists. It does not want roughness. It does not want evidence that you are still learning. It does not want the first version. But the first version is the price of everything real. You cannot edit what does not exist. You cannot improve what you refuse to produce. You cannot become strong in a room you never enter. If you want to see perfection clearly, stop listening to how elegant it sounds and start measuring what it produces. Does it help you begin? Does it help you send, submit, publish, practice? Draft, test, decide, and move? Or does it keep you circling, planning, tightening, and postponing? That is the test. Anything that repeatedly keeps you from entering the work is not protecting your standards. It is protecting your fear. This does not mean standards are bad. Standards matter. Care matters. Craft matters. But standards must serve movement, not cancel it. Standards must shape revision, not forbid beginning. There is a mature way to care deeply about quality. It does not demand brilliance at the doorway. It accepts rough entry and stronger refinement later. Perfection refuses that sequence. It wants final stage quality at first contact. That is why it blocks action. So name the trap without decorating it. Perfection is not always proof that you care. Sometimes it is the polished excuse that keeps you from risking a real first move. It does not always make your work better. Very often it makes your work later rarer and heavier. And what keeps you from beginning is not always a lack of discipline. Sometimes it is the fact that you turn the beginning into a standard no real human being can meet. See that clearly. Because once the old trap is exposed, you are ready for a better rule. A rule that respects reality. A rule that puts movement back at the center. A rule strong enough to carry you out of fantasy and into work. That rule is simple. Done imperfectly beats delayed beautifully. Chapter 6. Done imperfectly beats delayed beautifully. Once perfection loses its shine, you need something stronger to replace it. You need a working principle, not a cute phrase, not a temporary mood. A principle you can carry into real days, real tasks, and real resistance. Here it is done imperfectly, beats delayed beautifully. This rule matters because it restores the order that perfection destroyed. Perfection taught you to value imagined quality over actual movement. This rule puts movement back where it belongs. It says a flawed action in the real world has more value than a beautiful possibility that never leaves your head. That may sound obvious when you say it out loud, but many people do not live by it. They still secretly believe that a bad first version is shameful, that a rough beginning is evidence of weakness, and that a delayed but elegant future attempt is somehow more respectable than an unfinished effort today. That belief keeps them trapped. This new principle breaks that spell. An imperfect action has power because it creates contact with reality. It gives you data. It shows you what is unclear. It reveals what needs work. It teaches your nervous system that beginning is survivable. It lowers fear for the next attempt. It creates momentum information and proof that you can move. A beautifully delayed plan does none of that. It gives you imagined satisfaction without earned progress. It lets you rehearse the work without entering the work. It protects your fantasy and starves your development. That is why the rough draft, the awkward rehearsal, the incomplete version, the basic outline, the imperfect first message, and the 10 clumsy minutes of effort matter so much. They are not embarrassments. They are bridges. They carry you from thinking into doing. They let the work become something you can touch. Once the work exists in any form, your relationship to it changes. You stop being haunted by an invisible standard. You start dealing with something concrete, and concrete things can be improved. This is why movement must become more honorable to you than appearance. Not because appearance never matters, but because appearance cannot lead. Movement must lead. Movement creates the conditions for refinement. Perfection tries to reverse that order. It says refine before you begin, polish before you produce, feel sure before you act. But reality does not work that way. Clarity often comes after contact, not before it. Confidence often grows after repetition, not before it. Skill often rises by surviving imperfection, not by avoiding it. If you wait to feel clean before you move, you will wait too long. If you wait to move until you can be proud of the first version, you will miss the stage where pride is not the point. In the beginning, your job is not to impress. Your job is to enter. That is what this principle defends. Enter the work. Enter the process. Enter the imperfect beginning. A page with bad sentences can be revised. A page with no sentences cannot. A 10-minute walk can restart momentum. A perfect fitness plan that never begins cannot. A difficult conversation handled awkwardly can still create truth. A brilliant conversation rehearsed forever in your head changes nothing. This is not a philosophy of carelessness. It is a philosophy of traction. It does not tell you to produce garbage and call it done. It tells you to stop treating the first move as if it must already deserve applause. The first move has a simpler job. It must exist. That is enough for now. Too many people judge early action by final stage standards. They look at the first version and ask whether it is impressive. That is the wrong question. The right question is whether it gets you into motion, whether it reduces fear, whether it gives you something real to respond to, whether it moves the task from imagination into form. Once you use that standard, imperfect work stops looking like failure. It starts looking like function. It starts looking like the honest cost of progress. So replace the old question with a better one. Not, can I do this beautifully right now? Ask, what real imperfect version can I do right now? That one shift changes the doorway. It brings the work down from the fantasy world into your hands. There is another reason this principle matters. It protects self-trust. Every time you choose imperfect action over beautiful delay, you send yourself a new message. I do not need perfect conditions to move. I do not need to perform readiness before I begin. I do not need to worship the first attempt. I can meet the work where I am. That message is powerful because it weakens the old identity wound created by procrastination. It rebuilds your trust in your own ability to act before certainty arrives. That kind of trust is not built by thinking better thoughts. It is built by repeated contact with small, imperfect, real action. You need to stop being shocked that beginnings look like beginnings. Of course, they look rough. Of course, they feel smaller than the fantasy. Of course, they expose your current level. That is not a flaw in the process. That is the process. The person who gets strong is not the person who avoided rough beginnings. It is the person who stopped treating rough beginnings like humiliation. That is maturity. This new rule also frees you from the emotional theater around productivity. You no longer need to feel inspired enough, prepared enough, or clean enough to start. You can say something simpler. Good, not perfect. Real, not delayed. Started, not worshipped. Once that becomes your inner standard, pressure drops. The task no longer has to carry your image, your future, and your self-worth. It only has to carry the next move. That makes action lighter. And lighter action repeats more easily. That is what you want. Not one dramatic day of flawless output. Repeated contact with the work. Repeated proof that starting rough is still starting. Repeated evidence that the work gets better by being touched, not by being admired from a distance. So lock this rule in. Done imperfectly beats delayed beautifully. A rough first draft beats a perfect unwritten one. A basic beginning beats an elegant postponement. A real attempt beats a polished excuse. Keep this principle close, because you will need it whenever perfection returns wearing a reasonable face. And it will return. It will tell you to wait a little longer, clean it up a little more, prepare a little better. Begin when the moment feels more honorable. When it does, answer with action. Not grand action, real action. Because the person you are trying to become will not be built by waiting for beautiful beginnings. That person will be built by entering the work before beauty arrives. And once you understand that one more illusion must die, the illusion that there is some perfect time coming later when beginning will finally feel clean. Chapter 7. Stop chasing the perfect moment. Perfection does not only attach itself to quality, it also attaches itself to timing. Many people are not just waiting to do the work well. They are waiting to begin at the right moment, when they have more energy, when the schedule is lighter, when the mind is clearer, when the pressure fades, when the room is quieter, when the plan is more organized, when they feel more like themselves, when life settles down. That fantasy is powerful because it sounds reasonable. It sounds mature to wait for the right window. It sounds wise to begin when conditions support success. But there is a difference between using judgment and worshiping a future moment that never arrives. That difference matters, because a lot of waiting is not strategy. It is avoidance dressed in clean language. The perfect moment is one of procrastination's most elegant disguises. It does not say, do not do it. It says, do it later under conditions that will finally make the work easier and better. But life does not often give you a clean field. Life gives you mixed days, tired mornings, interrupted plans, half-clear thinking, imperfect windows, limited time, uneven energy. That is normal life. If you demand ideal conditions before you begin, you will spend large parts of your life in emotional waiting rooms, always near the work, rarely in it. This is one of the quiet ways time gets lost. Not in chaos, in waiting. Waiting for readiness, waiting for the mood, waiting for a day that feels more worthy of the effort, waiting for the magical combination of clarity, strength, time, and confidence. But while you wait, the task does not stay neutral. It grows heavier. It gathers more meaning. The longer you delay, the more symbolic it becomes. Now, it is not just the report, the email, the draft, the workout, or the decision. Now, it is the thing you have been avoiding for days or weeks. Now it represents all the previous delays. Now it has to be good enough to justify the waiting. That is how waiting makes beginning harder, not easier. You think you are protecting the task by waiting for better conditions. In reality, you are turning it into a myth. You are turning an ordinary action into an event. You are building a stage around something that needed a door. This is why the perfect moment must be exposed for what it is. Not always wisdom, often polite delay. The person who moves does not wait for life to become clean. They lower the standard for entry. They stop asking whether this is the ideal time and start asking whether this is real enough for one step. That question changes everything. Real enough is available far more often than perfect. Real enough says, I may be tired, but I can open the file. Real enough says, I may not finish today, but I can begin. Real enough says, the conditions are mixed, but the next move is still possible. That is how action returns to daily life, not through ceremonial readiness, through usable entry. You need to understand the emotional cost of waiting for the right moment. Every day you postpone. You strengthen the belief that beginning requires special conditions. Then ordinary moments stop looking usable. A regular afternoon feels insufficient. A tired evening feels disqualified. A messy morning feels wrong. Slowly, your life becomes full of moments you no longer count as valid starting points. That is dangerous, because real progress is built inside ordinary moments, not just exceptional ones. If you only honor perfect conditions, you reduce the number of doors your life offers you, and then you tell yourself you lack time when what you often lack is permission to start inside normal life. There is another problem. Waiting for the perfect moment teaches dependence on mood. It trains you to ask, do I feel right enough to begin? But mood is unstable. Energy changes. Confidence changes. Clarity changes. If your action depends on all of those aligning first, your action will remain fragile. You need something steadier. A standard that survives ordinary imperfection. A standard that says the moment does not need to be ideal. It only needs to be usable. This is how mature action works. Mature action is not romantic. It does not wait for music in the background. It does not ask the day to prove itself first. It sees a real opening and enters, even briefly, even awkwardly, even without the emotional glamour of a fresh start. That is strength. Not because it feels heroic, but because it breaks the fantasy that life will one day present you with a completely frictionless doorway. It usually will not, and you do not need it to. The people who keep moving are rarely the ones with the most perfect days. They are the ones who stop treating imperfect days as unusable. They learn to begin in the middle of life, not outside it. That is what you must learn now. Stop asking for a cleaner day than the one you have. Stop telling yourself that later will automatically be easier. Sometimes later is heavier. Sometimes later carries more shame, more urgency, and more distance from the work. Sometimes later is simply another word for increased pressure. If a step is available now, honor now. Not all of it, not the whole mountain. The real step, the available step, the step you can take under present conditions. That is enough. The shift you need is simple but serious. Do not begin when the moment becomes perfect. Begin when the moment becomes real enough. That one change protects you from years of elegant delay. It stops you from building fantasies about future versions of yourself who will finally feel ready. It brings action back into this day, this body, this level of energy, this ordinary hour. And that is exactly where your life can change. Not in the day you keep imagining, in the one you are standing in. So let this phase end with a cleaner standard. You do not need a perfect day. You do not need perfect energy. You do not need a perfect opening. You need a real step. One real step that taken in a real moment is worth more than another week spent waiting for conditions to look beautiful. Stop chasing the perfect moment. Respect the available one. That is where movement begins. Chapter 8. Make it easy to start. You do not need more pressure to begin. You need less friction. That is the shift. For a long time, you may have believed that the problem was not enough force, not enough discipline, not enough urgency, not enough self-control. So you tried to create motion the only way you knew. You raised the stakes. You tightened your standards. You waited for fear to become big enough to push you. Sometimes that worked for a day. Sometimes it worked for an hour. But it came with a cost. The work became tied to tension. Starting became tied to discomfort. Your mind learned that action meant conflict. No wonder beginning kept getting harder. A system built on inner violence can produce bursts, but it rarely produces trust. And without trust, every new task feels like another fight. That is why this phase must become practical. You understand the overload now. You see the pressure. You have exposed the perfection trap. Good. Now stop staring at the problem and start changing the doorway. Make it easier to start. Not easier to care. Not easier to quit. Easier to enter. That is the target. Most people think the important part is the size of the goal. Often it is not. Often the important part is the size of the first move. If the first move feels too heavy, the whole task stays outside the door. If the first move feels light enough, your mind is less likely to resist. That is not weakness. That is design. A locked door does not open because you insult it. It opens when you reduce what is keeping it shut. Your beginning works the same way. When you sit down and tell yourself to finish the whole report, solve the whole problem, write the whole chapter, clean the whole room, or fix the whole week, your mind feels the full weight at once. It hears totality. It hears pressure. It hears the old demand to perform. Then, resistance rises before your hands even move. But there is another trap here that deserves its own warning: oversized promises to yourself. I will catch up on everything tonight. I will fix the whole backlog this weekend. I will finally get my life fully together today. I will make up for all the delay in one hard push. Those promises feel powerful in the moment because they let you imagine redemption. But very often they are not promises. They are pressure grenades. They blow up the doorway. They make the first move too emotionally expensive. They turn the start into an impossible test. Then, when you fail to meet that inflated promise, you add fresh disappointment to the task. That is how good intentions become new friction. So stop admiring big promises just because they sound intense. Intensity is not the same as usefulness. A useful promise is small enough to survive contact with reality. A useful promise lowers the threshold of entry instead of raising it. Open the document. Write one ugly line. Put on the shoes. Read the first page. Sort the first 5 items. Reply with one clear sentence. Name only the next step. Suddenly, the work is still real, but the cost of entry is lower. This matters because the hardest transition is often not from bad work to good work. It is from no motion to some motion, from closed to open, from avoiding to touching. Once contact begins, the task usually becomes more manageable than it looked from a distance, but from a distance everything swells. That is why you must stop treating the start like a ceremony. The first step is not there to impress you. It is there to get you in. Many people secretly reject this because they think lighter starts are childish. They think serious people should be able to attack hard things directly. But serious people are not defined by how dramatically they begin. They are defined by whether they return, whether they keep going, whether they can enter again tomorrow without needing a crisis to force them. If a lighter entry point helps you build that pattern, then it is not childish. It is intelligent. The old model says if I were truly disciplined, I would just do the whole thing. The better model says if I want consistent action, I must lower the friction between intention and motion. That difference changes everything. It turns productivity from a moral test into a design problem. Not what is wrong with me, but what is making this harder to start than it needs to be. Sometimes the answer is the way you are defining the task. Too large, too vague, too loaded. Sometimes the answer is the environment. Too noisy, too many tabs, too many choices. Sometimes the answer is the way you are talking to yourself. Too harsh, too absolute, too focused on the outcome. But in every case, the principle stands. Reduce what makes starting expensive. You are not trying to trick yourself into doing meaningless things. You are trying to make the next real move easier to accept. There is power in this because beginning should not require a perfect emotional state. It should require a usable doorway. That is what you are building now. A doorway you can use on ordinary days, not just heroic ones. A doorway that works when energy is mixed. A doorway that works when mood is average. A doorway that works when life is still life. The simpler the doorway, the less drama the mind can create around it. And drama is the enemy of consistent action. The more dramatic the start feels, the more your nervous system braces. The smaller and clearer the start feels, the easier it is to cross the line. This is why your first goal is not to make the whole task easy. That would be unrealistic. Your first goal is to make the start easier than avoidance, easier than opening another tab, easier than bargaining for 30 more minutes, easier than running the usual loop. Once the first move feels lighter than the escape route, your chances change. You also need to stop asking too much of the opening minute. The opening minute is not supposed to carry your ambition, your identity, and your entire plan. It is supposed to create contact. That is enough. Contact before momentum. Entry before intensity. Start before scale. If you respect that order, work becomes less theatrical and more repeatable. This is how real progress begins. Not with a speech, not with a burst of perfection, with a doorway so clear and so light that your mind has fewer reasons to refuse it. So use this rule from now on. When something matters, do not ask how to make yourself harder. Ask how to make the first move easier, easier to see, easier to begin, easier to accept. Keep shrinking the entry point until resistance loses some of its power. Open the file, write the title, stand up, put one thing away, start the timer. Read one paragraph. Make the beginning real enough and light enough that the brain cannot keep pretending it is a mountain. Because you do not need to become a heroic version of yourself before you move. You need a start simple enough to break the spell of delay. That is how action returns. Not through force first, through friction reduction first. Make it easy to start. Then let movement do the rest. Chapter 9. Do only what matters. First. Once you can start, a second problem appears. You may begin, but then you bring too much into the moment. Too many goals, too many side tasks, too many open loops, too many things you feel you should also fix while you are here. This is where many people lose the ground they just gained. They finally enter the work, but they do not protect the entry. They flood it. They try to catch up on everything at once. They tell themselves this is the mature move. Clear it all. Handle it all. Fix the whole backlog. Use this one burst to get your whole life under control. That thinking feels ambitious, but it recreates the same pressure in a new form. You are back under weight. Back under totality, back under the old demand that this session must redeem too much. That is why the next principle matters: do only what matters first. Not everything that matters. What matters first. This rule is smaller, cleaner, and stronger than it sounds. It does not tell you to stop caring about the rest. It tells you to stop carrying the rest into the opening move. There is a difference. When your mind is overloaded, scope becomes a weapon against you. The wider the field, the easier it is to freeze. The more you try to hold at once, the less likely you are to act on what truly counts. That is why narrowing the scope is not avoidance. It is relief in service of action. It is how you protect what matters from being buried under volume. Many people say they are overwhelmed by time when they are actually overwhelmed by simultaneous importance. Everything feels unfinished. Everything feels connected. Everything feels like it should already be handled. In that state, the brain struggles to prioritize because every item seems to carry guilt, and guilt makes sorting harder. So instead of choosing one thing cleanly, you keep glancing at 5 things, 10 things, 20 things. That scattered attention feels busy, but it produces very little. The solution is not to become more frantic. The solution is to become more decisive. Ask one question: what matters first? Not what else can I squeeze in? Not what would make me feel less guilty for a moment. Not what gives me the illusion of getting organized. What matters first? That question cuts through noise. It restores order. It reminds you that not all tasks are equal in timing, consequence, or usefulness. Some things are urgent but not meaningful. Some things are easy but not important. Some things are loud but not central. If you treat all of them the same, your energy gets consumed by motion that looks active but leaves the real weight untouched. Then, at the end of the day, you feel the terrible mix of busyness and failure. You did many things but not the thing. That feeling destroys self-trust. So stop earning that feeling. Do what matters first. This is not always the biggest task in theory. It is the task that most deserves the cleanest part of your attention right now. It may be the step that unlocks other steps. It may be the thing you keep avoiding because it matters. It may be the one action that once done reduces the most pressure. But whatever it is, it needs protection from the crowd of lesser demands. This is where maturity begins, not in doing more, in choosing better. A serious person is not the one who treats every task like an emergency. A serious person is the one who can identify the true first thing and let the rest wait without turning that into a moral failure. That skill saves energy. It also saves dignity. Because nothing burns you out faster than trying to honor everything equally. You were not built to carry every open loop into 1 hour. You were built to choose, to enter one real lane, to move one important piece, to accept that progress often comes through sequence, not simultaneous heroics. There is freedom in this. If you only need to do what matters first, the field becomes less threatening. Your brain no longer has to solve the whole map before taking a step. It only has to identify the next meaningful target. That lowers pressure. It also lowers perfection. Because once you narrow the scope, you stop demanding total rescue from one work session. You stop asking today to fix the whole week. You stop asking 1 hour to erase months of avoidance. You stop using work as a stage for redemption. You let it become what it should be, the next necessary move. This principle becomes especially important when you have fallen behind. When people fall behind, they often panic and try to attack everything. They answer backlog with breadth. But breadth under pressure leads to poor decisions. You end up doing a little of many things and finishing nothing that eases the deeper stress. A better response is narrower. What matters first now? What would reduce the real load, not just create the appearance of activity? What deserves the first clean effort, even if other things remain undone? These questions protect you from the chaos of false urgency. They help you act from clarity instead of guilt. And guilt is a terrible manager. It is loud, but it is not wise. It pushes you toward visible motion, quick relief, and scattered effort. Clarity does the opposite. It narrows. It decides. It lets one thing rise above the rest. That is how the mind settles enough to work. There is another gift in doing what matters first. It creates emotional proof. When you choose the real first thing and actually move it, you teach yourself that pressure does not have to control your sequence. Guilt does not have to choose for you. Noise does not have to lead. That kind of proof rebuilds authority inside you. You begin to trust that you can sort the important from the merely present. That trust matters more than people realize. Because procrastination is not just delay. It is often the erosion of inner authority. The feeling that everything pulls on you at once and you cannot lead yourself cleanly through the noise. This rule repairs that. Do only what matters first. Not because the rest is meaningless, but because the first thing needs room, needs dignity, needs the cleanest part of your available attention. Give it that. Then and only then decide what comes next. This is not a trick for one afternoon. It is a way of working that respects human limits and still produces progress. It says, I do not need to clear all pressure before I begin. I need to stop multiplying it by carrying too much into the same hour. It says I can leave some things undone without becoming a failure. I can choose the central thing and move it. I can reduce overload by honoring sequence. Keep this rule close when your mind gets crowded again, because it will. The answer will not be to do more first. The answer will be to do what matters first. Name the one thing. Define the first step. Do it first. That is how the field becomes workable again. That is how the next step stops drowning in the noise of everything else. Chapter 10. Small Steps. Create real momentum. A lot of people still resist small steps even after they understand everything else. They hear small and think weak. They hear small and think slow. They hear small and think that it is not enough to change anything real. So they keep waiting for the larger move, the more powerful burst the day they finally attack life with full force. But that idea has trapped them before, and it will trap them again if they do not challenge it now. Small steps are not the opposite of serious change. Small steps are often the only form of serious change that can survive long enough to become real. You need to stop confusing the size of a step with the size of a future. A small step can still belong to a big life. In fact, it usually does. Because real momentum does not come from imagination. It comes from repeated movement. Movement concrete enough to happen. Movement light enough to begin. Movement clean enough to return to tomorrow. That is why small steps matter so much here. They protect the bridge between relief and action. After all the pressure and perfection we have stripped away, you need a way to move that does not rebuild the same old trap. Small steps do that. They let you begin without asking the beginning to do too much. They create progress without demanding a heroic emotional state. They lower the cost of entry and increase the chance of repetition. And repetition is where momentum is born. Most people misunderstand momentum. They think momentum means feeling powerful, feeling unstoppable, feeling on fire. But that is not the only form it takes, and it is rarely the most reliable. Real momentum is simpler. It is the growing ease of continuing once you have already begun. It is the shift from friction to flow, even if the flow is quiet. It is the psychological change that happens when the task moves from untouched to touched, from invisible to visible, from resisted to active. Once something has started, the next small move often costs less than the first. That is why the first step matters so much. Not because it solves everything, but because it changes the state of the system. Before the first step, there is resistance, projection, and uncertainty. After the first step, there is contact. And contact changes what is possible. Think about how many times the hardest part was not continuing but beginning. Once you were in, once the sentence existed, once the shoes were on, once the call was made. Once the first 10 minutes were done, the work became less mythical, less swollen, less abstract. That is momentum at the psychological level, not explosion, continuation becoming easier than avoidance. You need to respect that, because when you respect it, you stop waiting for giant effort and start building usable motion. This is what saves people from all or nothing living. They no longer say, if I cannot do a full intense session, there is no point. They say, what is the real small step that keeps the chain alive? That question protects progress on ordinary days. It keeps identity from depending on dramatic performance. It allows consistency to survive. Fatigue, imperfect schedules, and mixed energy. This matters because your life will contain mixed energy. If your system only works on powerful days, it does not really work. A stronger system works on average days too. It lets a small step count as real. It understands that doing a little of the right thing often beats doing none of it while waiting for a better mood. This is not self-deception. It is respect for compounding. One page does not look impressive. One paragraph does not look impressive. 10 minutes does not look impressive. But repeated contact does something performance fantasies cannot do. It changes your relationship to the work. It weakens fear. It restores familiarity. It builds identity quietly. You stop being the person who endlessly prepares to act and become the person who acts in small, real ways over and over, even when conditions are ordinary. That shift is deeper than one big day. It is more transferable too. Because once you learn how to take one real small step in one area, you can use that logic anywhere. Health, writing, money, work, recovery, relationships. The rule stays the same. Lower the entry. Choose the first meaningful move. Repeat it before drama returns. There is another reason small steps matter. They keep hope honest. Large promises can excite you, but they can also deceive you. They let you feel transformed before you have actually changed anything. Small steps remove that fantasy. They ask less emotion and more reality. They say, fine, prove it in one move. Then prove it again. Then again. That is a harder kind of hope, a quieter one. But it is also more trustworthy because it is built on evidence, not self-talk. The person who keeps taking small, real steps ends up somewhere the person waiting for giant action rarely reaches. Not because they were more gifted, because they kept converting intention into movement. That is the bridge most people keep missing. They have vision, they have regret, they have plans, they have insight, but they do not have enough conversion. Small steps fix conversion. They turn the inner world into a visible act. They make your values touch the ground. Once that happens, enough times momentum becomes more than a momentary push. It becomes a pattern. You begin to expect motion from yourself. Not perfect motion. Real motion. The kind that can survive your actual life. This is the image of success you need now, not the fantasy of the flawless comeback. Not the image of the warrior version of you crushing everything in one sweeping day. A better image. You begin the right thing. You take the first real step. You come back tomorrow. You let movement accumulate. You let action become familiar. That is success in a form you can live inside. So stop worshiping big beginnings. Stop acting as if only dramatic effort counts. The truth is more useful than that. Small steps create real momentum because they turn possibility into contact and contact into continuation. They make starting less sacred and repeating more normal. They help you move before you feel magnificent. They let your life change at a scale your nervous system can actually accept. Hold on to that, because you do not need a heroic version of yourself to move forward right now. You need one step real enough to begin, one target clear enough to matter, and one pattern steady enough to repeat. That is how momentum starts, quietly, honestly, in small steps that slowly become a life. Chapter 11. Work without fighting yourself all day. A lot of people think they are working well when they are actually staying in conflict with themselves from morning to night. They wake up tense. They carry a list like a threat. They move through the day with a constant inner voice, pushing, judging, warning, comparing, and demanding. On the surface, this can look serious. It can even feel serious. There is effort. There is pressure. There is strain. There is that familiar sense of trying hard. But trying hard is not the same as working well. Conflict is not the same as commitment. Pain is not the same as progress. You need to separate those things now, because one of the biggest traps after you start making progress is rebuilding the same old prison in a new shape. You finally learn how to begin. You finally lower the pressure. You finally stop worshiping perfect conditions. Then, without noticing, you create a new rule. Now I must stay on all day. Now I must keep proving that I am disciplined. Now I must never relax, never ease up, never slow down, because if I do, I will slide back again. That fear creates a new kind of suffering. You are no longer only avoiding work. You are now fighting yourself to keep working. That may sound better, but it is still war. And a life built on daily war with yourself is not stable. It burns too much energy. It makes every task emotionally expensive. It turns effort into constant self-surveillance. That kind of working can produce bursts. It can make you feel intense. It can create a few days that look impressive from the outside. But if your method depends on living in tension all day, The method is flawed. You are paying too much for every result. This chapter must reset the standard. Good work is not work that always feels like battle. Good work is work you can return to without needing to threaten yourself back into it. Good work is not fueled by self-hatred, panic, and constant inner correction. Good work has a rhythm. It has gravity without cruelty. It has seriousness without inner violence. It lets you move through the day with enough steadiness that action is still available tomorrow. That is the key. Tomorrow. A sustainable pace is not exciting in the way self-punishment is exciting. It does not create the same dramatic identity. It does not let you say you fought like a machine all day. It is quieter than that. More honest, too. It asks a different question. Not how much can I squeeze out of myself today, but what pace lets me stay in contact with what matters without turning my own mind into an enemy camp. That is a mature question. It protects your future, not just your pride. Many people have been trained to trust strain more than steadiness. If they do not feel stressed, they assume they are slacking. If they are not mentally yelling at themselves, they assume they are drifting. If the day does not feel hard enough, they suspect they are being weak. But that belief comes from an old model, a model where pain is proof of sincerity, a model where burnout is mistaken for commitment, a model where the only way to feel in control is to stay tight all day. That model is costly. It makes work heavier than it needs to be. It teaches the body to brace around responsibility. It turns normal effort into an endurance test. Then one of two things happens. Either you stay in that mode and slowly drain yourself, or you break from it and feel guilty for needing air. Neither outcome is strong. Neither outcome is sustainable. You need a better image of serious work. Serious work can look calm. Serious work can include pauses. Serious work can move in focused blocks instead of one endless inner whip. Serious work can be direct without being brutal. This matters because sustainability is not softness. Sustainability is structure that survives real life. It is the difference between a pace you can keep and a pace that collapses under its own intensity. If your system only works when you are scared, ashamed, or running on urgency, then your system is fragile. It is not enough to know how to start. You also need to know how to continue without making every day feel like punishment. That means you must stop using self-attack as fuel. Self-attack is loud, but it is inefficient. It consumes attention. It narrows creativity. It adds emotional tax to ordinary effort. It turns one task into two tasks, the work itself and the management of your own inner hostility. No wonder you feel exhausted. You are not just working. You are working while being chased from the inside. That is not a good way to live. A better rhythm is built on simpler rules. Do the real task. Keep the scope honest. Return when you drift. Rest without turning rest into betrayal. Start again without turning every pause into failure. This is what sane productivity looks like. It is less theatrical and more repeatable. It is less dependent on emotional spikes and more rooted in usable standards. You do not need to be at your maximum all day to be faithful to what matters. You need to stay connected to what matters without destroying your ability to come back. That is a different form of strength, a stronger one, because it does not collapse the moment life gets messy. It is built for real conditions, not fantasy conditions. There is an important identity shift here. Stop admiring the version of you that only works under pressure and start respecting the version of you that can work without creating inner pain first. That person is not weaker. That person is more trained, more mature, more trustworthy. They do not need emotional violence to move. They know how to enter, focus, pause, and return. They know that a good day is not measured only by how hard it felt. It is measured by whether the work was touched in a way that can be repeated. That is what you are building now. Not a harder mask, a better pace. A pace that does not betray the spirit of this book. You were never trying to become a machine. You were trying to become less trapped by pressure, less controlled by perfection, and more able to act in ordinary life. Do not lose that truth at the finish line. The goal is not to become someone who fights themselves all day and calls it discipline. The goal is to become someone who can meet the day with enough steadiness that the work gets done without constant inner war. That is the pace worth protecting, because sustainability matters more than intensity. Endurance matters more than drama. A rhythm you can live inside is worth more than a burst you have to recover from. So keep this standard close. If your way of working requires you to oppose yourself all day, the cost is too high. Build a better rhythm, one you can repeat. One that lets the work happen without turning your own mind into a battlefield. Chapter 12. When you fall behind. Begin again. You will fall behind again. You will have days when the old heaviness returns. Days when you delay too long. Days when the room gets noisy again inside your head. Days when the task grows larger than it is. Days when you know what you should do and still do not do it. This matters to say clearly because many people ruin their progress by expecting a clean ending. They think that if they really understood the lesson, they would never slip again. If they really changed, they would never drift again. If the system really worked, they would never lose the rhythm. That belief is dangerous because it turns ordinary human variation into evidence of total failure. Then one off day becomes a verdict. One delayed task becomes a collapse story. One tired week becomes proof that nothing changed. That is how people abandon a path that was actually helping them. They do not fail because they had a hard week. They fail because they interpret the hard week as the end of the story. Do not make that mistake. The difference is not between people who never fall behind and people who do. The difference is what happens next. Some people fall behind and immediately turn it into self-attack. They say, "Here we go again. I knew this would happen. I always ruin it. I cannot trust myself." They add shame to delay. They add identity damage to a practical problem. Then restarting becomes harder because now the task carries not only pressure but disappointment and self-contempt too. That is the old loop returning in a new form. You must not feed it. If you fall behind, begin again. That is the rule. Do not explain yourself for 3 days. Do not wait until Monday. Do not design a dramatic comeback. Do not punish yourself with impossible standards to make up for lost ground. Begin again. Cleanly, lightly, honestly. This is the final discipline of the book, the discipline of return. Return matters more than perfection. Return matters more than streak worship. Return matters more than a flawless record. Because in real life, rhythm is not protected by never missing. It is protected by not letting a miss become a new identity. You need to learn this deeply. Falling behind is a moment. Self-destruction is a choice that often follows the moment. Missed work hurts. Missed rhythm hurts. But the real damage usually comes from what you pile on afterward. The shame spiral. The all-or-nothing reaction. The urge to either erase the whole plan or come back with absurd intensity. Both reactions miss the point. The point is not to prove that you can return heroically. The point is to return quickly enough that the gap does not turn into a new myth. A person who knows how to begin again is stronger than a person who only knows how to go hard for a while. Because life will test your ability to resume more often than it will reward your ability to stay perfect. There will be travel, illness, family noise, work surges, emotional dips, confusing weeks, flat energy, invisible resistance. You do not need a system that pretends those things will never happen. You need a system that survives them. And that survival depends on your ability to begin again without drama, without ceremony, without a moral speech. Just begin again. Open the file again. Take the walk again. Make the call again. Do the small step again. Return to what matters before delay turns into myth. This is where compassion and responsibility must stand together. Compassion without return becomes indulgence. Responsibility without compassion becomes cruelty. You need both. Tell the truth about the drift. Yes, you slipped. Yes, you avoided. Yes, the rhythm got messy. Good. Now refuse to turn that truth into a weapon. Use it as a signal. Something got heavy again. Something widened too much. Something became loaded. Fine. Learn from it. But do not kneel before it. Begin again. This is the mature response to imperfection. Not denial, not punishment. Return. That word should become sacred to you in the right way. Not sacred like impossible. Sacred like central. Because the life you want will not be built by staying flawless. It will be built by shortening the distance between drifting and returning. That is the metric that matters. Not did I ever fall off, but how long did I stay away before I came back? That is how trust is rebuilt. Not by pretending you will never hesitate again, but by proving that hesitation does not own you for as long as it used to. Return faster. Return lighter. Return without rebuilding the old courtroom in your head. The day after a miss is especially important. That day often decides whether the slip stays small or expands into a season. If you begin again the next day, the miss remains a miss. If you spend 3 more days as in guilt, the miss becomes a pattern. This is why you must protect the next beginning. Do not ask for a grand recovery. Ask for re-entry. Ask for one real step that puts your hand back on the work. The first step after a slip may feel smaller than your pride wants. Take it anyway. Pride is not the point. Contact is the point. The person who knows how to return does not waste energy trying to make the comeback look impressive. They care about shortening the gap. They care about keeping the task human-sized. They care about protecting continuity, not performance. That is wisdom. And it is the right ending for this book, because this book never promised a perfect life. It promised something more believable and more useful. Less paralysis, less pressure, less perfection worship, more ability to begin, more ability to act lightly but truly, more ability to come back without harming yourself in the process. Hold that promise correctly. You do not need to eliminate all procrastination forever to live better. You need to stop being ruled by it. You need to stop turning every delay into self-hatred. You need to stop demanding perfect timing, perfect energy, and perfect emotional weather before you move. You need to know how to begin in real conditions and how to begin again when real life knocks you off balance. That is enough, more than enough if you live it. So let the final rule be simple and strong. Tell the truth. Choose the one thing. Take the smallest real step. Begin again, not once, as many times as life requires. Begin again before the shame gets loud. Begin again before the task becomes myth. Begin again before one hard day becomes a false identity. Begin again because your future does not need your perfection. It needs your return. Begin again because you are no longer building a life around pressure and punishment. You are building one around reality, clarity, and repeatable movement. Begin again because that is how ordinary people create extraordinary change over time, not by never drifting, by refusing to stay gone.